Hi, I'm Jennifer Isabella.
And I'm Srividya Sridharan.
Your co-host for Forrester's podcast, What It Means, where we explore the latest market dynamics impacting executives and their customers. Today, we're joined by Principal Analyst Naomi Marr and Vice President and Principal Analyst Katie Tynan to discuss the skills and competencies that B2B marketers will need to succeed in their roles during the next 5 years. Welcome both.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So let's start with a pretty high level question and level set on what exactly do we mean by skills and competencies and business capabilities, terms we're going to be using throughout this episode.
Yeah, it's a great question. And we get this a lot because I think people throw this terminology around a lot. And many people who've been in business for any length of time have heard conversations about skills or been involved in competency modeling. And so it can get a little complicated. So I often use the example of public speaking for this. So what is public speaking? Is it a skill? Is it a competency? Is it a business capability? Well, Forrester needs analysts to be able to speak in public, to present ideas, to stand up on stage and talk about things. So that is a business capability, to have analysts who can go out and deliver great presentations and inspire people. But individually, what makes up that capability on the part of each of those analysts? Well, it's a competency that we call public speaking, which is made up of underlying skills. And those skills might be the ability to use PowerPoint to draft a presentation. It might be a research skill in order to create the data that shows up in that presentation. It might be an understanding of the practice of public speaking and how one delivers that message in a meaningful and interesting way. So the skills are really the atomized elements of a competency, and a competency is a thing that has business value. And then people with competencies make up the capability that the business is then able to deliver.
And I'm so glad we're having this conversation, especially in this day and age where, it's AI everywhere. And it's good to talk about humans and what humans do. It's very refreshing. So why do we need new skills and competencies? What's not working? Are humans, do us as humans, where do we have to focus on the future skills? What are some of those drivers that is kind of changing the need to kind of invest in different skills or build different skills?
Well, your example of generative AI and AI in general is a good one to talk about, because let's keep on that example of public speaking and say, well, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, what did you need to be able to do in order to have that competency of public speaking? Some of the things would be the same, but some of them would be really different. So, for example, right now, I might use generative AI to go out and help me find examples of companies that have done certain things that I'm speaking about. Otherwise, in the past, before the internet, I might have had to pick up the phone or open a book. So the skills that underlie any particular capability change over time. I'll give you another example. I started my career in IT. I have certifications in technologies that do not exist anymore. So having a competency still means refreshing the underlying skills that are necessary to deliver that business capability through my competency. So it might mean that now, in order for me to be effective in doing my job, I need to develop some skills in prompt engineering. I need to get better at understanding how generative AI might be right or wrong in terms of the results that it gives me. So those are the technical skills that sometimes change and require us to keep up with all of those things in order to continue to deliver that competency and that business capability.
But generative AI or emerging tech is not the only factor, right? That's driving the need to kind of evaluate or reevaluate skills and competencies across your teams. What are a few other ones that we should throw in the mix here?
So that's a great question because, of course, new technology changes what skills we need, but there's a couple of other things that are going on. And you've probably heard some of this in the news and the news media. There's been a lot of talk about changes in workforce demographics. So we have been living for the last 10 years through a bubble of a somewhat abundant workforce, meaning we had the baby boomers moving through. We had millennials come into the workforce, and both of those things at the same time just elevated purely the number of people that we had in the workforce. But that is declining. And in the last few years, especially post-COVID, we have seen an exit from the workforce of a number of demographics of folks just for a variety of reasons. But what that means is there aren't as many people to hire anymore. So if your habit was when you needed new skills, you just went out and hired people who had those skills, that practice is not going to be sustainable in the future. So that is a trend that we watch and that we think about in upskilling is now we need to build more skills than we can buy. But in addition to that, we also know that skills development does something else important. One of the main reasons that people leave their organizations, and this is true in exit surveys and lots of data tells us that lack of career progression and lack of skills development is a reason people leave their organizations. So it's another driving force to why upskilling becomes important is because you are actually retaining your employees by helping them develop new skills. And that's a little counterintuitive. There are a lot of people who would say, well, what if we train these people in these great new skills and then they leave and take that somewhere else? But it's the opposite. When you train people and help them develop new skills, they are often more likely to stay with you and stay in your organization.
So sounds like this is a perfect storm of a lot of factors, technology, workforce dynamics, the career progression, stagnation, a lot of factors playing into the need for new skills and competencies. So over the next 5 years, as B2B marketers, what are those skills and competencies that they should focus on building and creating?
So for B2B marketers, it's really going to be important to possess both technical skills, but also very human skills. And actually, I was laughing, Katie, when you were talking, because I also spent a long time in IT, and I also have a bunch of certifications that I no longer use. So we'll have to have that conversation someday. But with regard to the skills, starting with technology, I think that prompt engineering, AI prompt engineering is going to be something that's important. But I would take that even a step further and say B2B marketers really are also going to know how to test AI and validate how accurate AI is. And you're going to have to be able to experiment with new technology. And, we have a saying these days where we say adaptability is the new superpower for B2B marketers. It's something that we're really going to have to focus on. Now, I would say there's also a need to truly understand the privacy and trust laws that are changing and to ensure that as a B2B marketer, you understand that. That's a little bit of a combination of tech and legal, but it is something that's going to be needed. And then finally, on the tech side, I will say a B2B marketer is going to have to understand the signals that customers are giving us in order to build out that full 360-degree view of the customer. They're actually telling us quite a bit using all of the technology. We need to be able to understand those signals and then serve them up the user journey that's best for their needs. On the soft skills side, I would say a lot of it is self-efficacy and cognitive skills and working well with others. It's having empathy and having excellent communication skills. So it's just a lot of leadership skills and being motivated and creative to remain adaptable.
Yeah, and when we think about that in the skills space and we think about those technical skills and those human skills, we use a 4-part model to talk about that. There's 4 dimensions of skills. There's hard skills, and those are specific skills for what you do, including technology, including practices that are specific to B2B marketing, practices that are specific to your industry. Those are hard skills. Then you have soft skills, which we're pretty familiar with, and those have been rebranded a little bit as human skills, right? So communication skills, project management skills, collaboration skills, all of that. But there's two others, and I think they're really relevant in every industry right now. One is leadership skills. How are we helping develop the leaders within our organization? Who are we choosing as leaders? What leadership skills are we giving them in order to help them be more effective in leading teams in this very complex world that we live in? And the last one is business acumen. And business acumen is, what do we do here? How do we make money? How does what I do connect to what the business does? And so when we're thinking about upskilling, I think it's easy for a lot of organizations to just jump to the hard skills. Oh, we just need to train people in this. We need to buy this learning program. We need to do this thing. But the reality is we need to think about developing that whole person in all four of those dimensions in order to get those business capabilities out from the competencies on the other side.
That's a great point, Katie. And I think something else that leaders need to consider right now is starting with hiring practices and recruiting practices and starting to look for folks who have skills that will meet future needs, not necessarily just hiring for a job description today. And that's a conscious shift that leaders have to make with regard to the skills and people that they bring into their teams, for sure.
So the soft stuff is the hard stuff, clearly. We hear a lot about this, right? I mean, tech implementation's gone wrong or not fast enough. It all comes down to people and humans. So, Naomi, maybe you can dive a little bit deeper into, when you were talking about the skills that marketers would need, B2B marketers would need in the next 5 years. Does that vary by sub-function, revenue operations leader, a demand leader, a portfolio leader? Help us kind of tease out some of the differences in skills that these sub-functions might need to invest in.
It absolutely is different depending on the sub-function. I will say with some of the research that we're doing around frontline marketing, the sub-functions and some of those silos will be broken down, and the sub-functions will have a better understanding across the functions. But, we're probably a couple of years from having frontline marketing teams and sub-function silos be completely gone. So in the interim, yes, each team is going to have their own skills and competencies that align to the work they're doing, right? It's not even their job, it's to the work that they do. So for example, for someone in RevOps, it might be a situation where they need data analysis and interpretation, or data visualization, or even data governance, and really understanding how data models hang together and how they can be used. For someone in a campaign function, campaign or program manager, they're going to have to understand signal visibility and what does that mean to them. They're going to have to understand the tech stack in a different way. We're talking about with clients about the fact that you actually have to partner with and push your vendor partners on understanding what their roadmap is, so that you can take advantage of features and functions and plan ahead on what you're upskilling your people on if there's a feature or function coming out that you'll be able to leverage in the future. So really being a partner. I would say with regard to Katie's reference around leadership skills, that is a huge one. So technical folks, and I kind of consider myself one of them, so I'm throwing myself under the bus here. But technical folks often struggle more with the soft skills than sometimes some of the more creative folks do. And I think from a leadership perspective, everyone across the organization is going to have the ability to have social influence and to bring people along on a journey with you, and to get agreement and that collaboration element. And that's going to be key across all the sub-functions. But yes, there will be different skills inside each sub-function.
And I think that's another important thing to highlight. And again, I come from the IT world. We've been in the same boat, I'm sure, Naomi, that for years, maybe even decades, because I'm not old, we promoted people who were amazing individual contributors in technical spaces, not because they wanted to be leaders, not because they enjoyed that practice, but because we wanted a track for them, a career track that elevated them. And the only way to do that was to put them in management and leadership roles. And it was a mistake. because you don't want people in leadership roles who don't want to be there. And so in some sense, there's a skills development element to this, but there's also an aspirational element to it. What do people want to learn? What do people want to do? And that's tremendously powerful. It is far better to have a less skilled person who really wants to be in a particular role and who is eager to learn and grow than it is to have an overskilled person who doesn't want to be there. So when we're thinking about skills development, it's not just about what do we need as an organization. It's also about what does this person want? What do they aspire to? What is their career goal? Which is why so much of this sits on the bedrock of good conversations between managers and their team members about where they are, where they want to go, and how they're going to get there.
Do we have a sense of like the current state, right? How are leaders feeling about the skills and competencies within their team? Are they feeling good about that? Do they see a major gap? Like, do you have a sense of that?
Yes. And actually, I have to say this data was pretty surprising when it came back and I got a chance to analyze it in the fall of last year. So just this past November, we ran a survey around organizational design and organizational thinking and thinking of organization as an innovation opportunity for B2B businesses right now. And essentially, we ask marketing leaders, they had to be director level or above. We asked marketing leaders if they thought that the structure of their organization would be sufficient for meeting their goals in the next 12 months. If the body of skills and competencies that they currently had on their team were going to be sufficient enough to meet their revenue goals in the next 12 months. And then also whether or not those marketers actually met their revenue goals in the previous year, right? So kind of balancing those. And what we saw come back, I guess the most startling metric was that only 7% of the leaders feel that they have the right skills and competencies on their teams to meet revenue goals for the next 12 months. I mean, 7% is a very low number. So those same marketers, they understand that a change is needed. And that's really where we're helping clients navigate those waters. Of those same leaders, I will say that 41% of them reported not having made their revenue goals in the prior 12 months. So there's definitely we're at a position where it's a stalemate and we've got to get through it and change is needed.
I think one of the other things that data tells us that's really important, though, is we're not just upskilling for the sake of upskilling. Right? We're not just going out and saying, let's build a big portfolio of skills because it's fun. It's very clear that lacking the right skills means lacking the right business capabilities, which means not executing on your business strategy in an effective way. And so from a business outcomes perspective, I think a lot of organizations tend to think of upskilling as, training. We have a training function and, that's the thing we spend money on. But they don't always connect the dots between if you're not doing that in a nice, holistic, thoughtful way, you are not going to get the business outcomes that you need. And it is increasingly urgent that you do that in a smart, meaningful way because this need for new skills is accelerating.
So it's, we've heard the term skills gap. This is a skills chasm, sounds like, in terms of, a huge, huge gap. What are leaders doing about it? How can we, now that we know this is a problem, we're preparing for the future, what can leaders do to start closing this gap?
There's three things that need to exist in order for us to close a skills gap. And this comes from a report that I wrote actually several years ago, and I'll probably refresh it again, ironically, because things are changing rapidly in the upskilling world. But the three pillars that we talk about when we talk about what's necessary for upskilling to happen. The first is technology. A lot of these skills are best learned through the application of learning technology. And that's not because technology is the best way to learn, but it is a part of the learning process. So we do need technology to help us, for example, assess skills gaps and track and manage all of these skills. It is not possible, and we know this from painful experience, to keep track of all the skills and competencies of the people in your organization on spreadsheets. It's just not. So we need technology that helps us understand the skills we have, understand the skills we need, develop new skills. All of that is great. But technology doesn't do all the work for us. It never, ever does. So that's one pillar. But if we tried to create a stool out of that one pillar, it would fall over. So what are the other two pillars? The second one is what I talked about before, good coaching conversations between managers and their team members to uncover those skills that people have, those skills that they aspire to learn, and apply those in their work. So we know that only 10% of how we learn comes from formal learning. The other 90% comes 20% from observational learning and 70% from actual practice. So we need managers to connect that formal learning to that practice and apply it in the work environment. But there's still something else. That's only 2 out of the 3 legs of the stool. And the third leg is time. And time is the hardest one to get. We have to create time for people to learn. We have to understand that learning new skills makes us inherently inefficient. So if we want to do something new, we have to have the time to learn it. And then we have to have the time to be bad at it and to practice and to get better at it. So in a lot of organizations, they just do the technology piece, or they just do the manager coaching conversations. But if you don't do all 3 together, you won't effectively be able to generate the momentum you need to do it at scale.
Katie, you've just hit on a really important point. We've seen some clients who are building open employee marketplaces where managers are able to post a project or a job that they have open that they are lacking resources for. And any other employee in the organization can apply to pick up that project. And what the organization is getting out of that is they're getting all of these extra hours of work, and they're closing out work in a more efficient manner because they've got folks who want to work on those projects working on those projects. So the open employee marketplace is definitely a concept that's becoming more popular right now. It's almost like the gig economy, but within your own company, right? And you have the opportunity to learn other things, and it's something that's fascinating.
Yeah, talent marketplace technology, which is becoming more common in learning management platforms, as well as in standalone skills intelligence platforms, is a trend that emerged when companies started recognizing that just providing learning platforms themselves was not enough. And my colleague Betsy Summers on the Future of Work team covers that space, talent marketplace, and also skills intelligence. So it is an incredibly rapidly growing space in organizations. And for many of the reasons you've described, right? When you're harnessing people's desire to learn new things and inherent intrinsic motivation to do things, you get a lot of value out of it. You do have to be a little careful that it's not exploitative, that we're not asking people to work 110% or 120% and burning themselves out. That's the time element. If you want the value of that, you have to intentionally create the time for it to happen. You also have to change some managerial culture. In a lot of cases, historically, leaders have hoarded talent, right? They said, these are my people and my team is successful because I have these great people. Talent marketplace could be a threat to that because people might go do work for another manager and then that makes them less available for their own manager. So again, it's that connection between the technology is awesome, but without the other legs of the stool, it doesn't hang together and it doesn't work.
It becomes a true cultural movement across the organization, really is what you need in order to have it be successful, for sure.
So I loved how you kind of whetted the appetite with this episode, because I know you both are going to be on stage at B2B Summit North America in May. So super excited about that. Can you maybe share a little bit more about what attendees should expect from your session?
Yes, sure. I think it's something that both Katie and I are really excited to be doing at Summit this May. So we are going to be getting down into the weeds a little bit with how you assess those skills gaps, how you build a learning plan that allows for that time that's needed and starts to shift the culture. We are going to do a handout with the 30, roughly 30 marketing skills of the future that will be needed for teams, and that's like a physical takeaway that folks can go then either use them for assessing their team or look at their own skills and give them some ideas for how to begin their own education, right? That's a part of it too, is the employee has a role in it. The business has a role in it, but the employee also has a role in it. And then I think we're gonna go through a couple of client examples and talk through some of, an example of a talent marketplace and an example of where they've truly done upskilling and reskilling and employee happiness has increased. So those are some of the things we're going to get into more detail on.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's been great to be here.
If you like what you heard today, check out our agenda for Forrester's B2B Summit North America, which includes over 100 analyst-led sessions filled with insights to drive your B2B marketing, sales, and product success. Learn more at forr.com/summit24. That's forr.com/summit24. Thanks for listening.